Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show I'm doing to celebrate the fact that 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and the entire hobby of tabletop role playing games. And I'm doing that, as you hopefully figured out by this point, by having guests on to talk about it. People who have worked on the product, worked at either TSR or Wizards of the Coast or some other related companies officially related to D&D, but our conversations go broader than that. We talk all about gaming and tabletop role-playing gaming in particular, but other kinds of gaming too. Had an interesting conversation the other day about computer gaming. You won't see that till next week because that's on the Christmas show that I just recorded. Secret stuff happens. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. I've got a guests. Slow down, Stan. You don't have to do it all immediately. I've got a guest today who I met when I got to Wizards of the Coast, but who has been involved in D&D through the RPGA well before that, and I've probably other things too. I'm not sure. I'm going to ask him when we talk to Mike Selinker. And I'm going to hit this button here, and here he is. Mike Selinker is here. Thank you for coming, Mike Selinker.
Are we out of the dungeon?
We're still in the dungeon. I've pulled you in.
No, I thought this was my escape. I thought that this was the way out.
It's like escape rooms. You got 60 minutes before you're getting out, buddy.
Oh, I better find that key. I
Hello,
stand.
Michael Pastor. You missed a secret recording. Well, you missed it because I didn't tell anyone. It was not broadcast live at all, even temporarily. I just recorded it locally, and you'll get to see it next week. Michael says you failed your secret doors check, Mike. You obviously are not an elf.
I well, I mean, I don't know how obvious it is. I mean, I got the ears for it. But yes, no, I'm happy to be in the dungeon with you, Stan, as I always
So thank you for joining me, Mike. Uh, I gave you a pretty poor introduction. What would you like? What is the introduction to Mike Selinker? Mike Selinker is he's a
am.
puzzle maker.
Introduction,
He's
the
Mike Selinker is a
introduction.
Figma wrapped in chestnut.
I really love the phrase "an introduction to Mike Selinker" because it sounds like something you would get, in the prologue of a book, right?
Yeah.
And then you realize, wow, this is all about pipeweed, and we're not going to get to Rivendell for 150 pages. Right, like that's almost certainly what that feels like. Yeah, I was born in the year of 1967, so I am most of the 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons and then some, or the 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons and then some. I got into the gaming world, or the world of gaming, when I was 11 years old,
Hmm.
and I was given a copy of uh, the the D&D box set, um, which is the first color product for Dungeons and Dragons. Right, the I don't know if it means anything to say it had a dragon on the cover, but like I don't
was
think
it
that helps
was it
anybody.
the Errol Otis dragon or the was
Yeah,
Dave Selden dragon? It's
yeah, no,
the
the first, the Air Lotus dragon, right?
Was it? Oh wait, I can do this now.
Cut
Was it
dice.
this dragon?
Yeah, you can do that now. Yes, it was that dragon. That's so awesome. What product, Stan? What product is that from?
That is from my 50 Years in the Dungeon 2025 calendar, which I kickstarted and I'm now nearly done fulfilling, and find that I have 20 or so extra copies, which are now. I mean, I can't really put a store up because I've only got 20 copies. But those of you watching, if you're interested, and you drop a comment in, you can get one for me. It's $25 plus shipping.
If you're watching this, get it before the end of the broadcast.
Yeah.
There you go.
Ed
So
Stark says it's the blue box. Yes. Well,
the blue box,
kind
right?
of. It's a
Yeah,
purple box.
I
It's
don't
the
know that
Holmes
that
edition.
helps. I don't know that that definition helps because the first Dungeons and
Right.
Dragons uh, set that Frank Menser made was also called the Blue Box. So whatever. It had dice that you had to take
You have
a
to color.
crayon. Yes,
It
and
came
so
with a
which
crayon.
yeah, exactly. Which is distinct from the box in which you didn't get dice, you just got a bunch of chits that you had to
But
pull out of a bag.
that
But
was the
whatever.
same box design.
I know, I know.
But
So
it's just
so
a
it's
different
important to
printing.
understand that it's like a second printing when they realize, hey, dice would be a good idea. Anyway, so I got that from uh
Well,
person who's now
you know that's not the case, right? That the reason it wasn't that they hadn't thought of dice when the chits came in the middle when they ran out of dice.
oh no, I guess I didn't
Do
know
you
that.
not know this
Okay.
story?
That's no, that's dumber than I thought it was.
Oh,
So
this is a great
I
story.
didn't realize. I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was that they didn't have the money to make dice
No,
until
no.
they sold a bunch of them. But it's the other way
So
around. They ran out of dice and they had to put. But they still had orders on hand.
this
I
is
see.
a story that Jim Ward uh, would tell to folks when he did his Day of Infamy every year at TSR.
Yeah,
Oh no! Suddenly
yeah.
I'm the guest on my own show. Every day,
Yeah, sounds
every
good.
year at TSR on the anniversary when he had been laid off, he called everyone who worked for him. He made us stop working and come in, and he bought cake or ice cream and told us stories for the afternoon about the day that will live in infamy, as he called it. And one of the stories is about how the dice problem happened. I was lucky enough to get Jim on this show a few weeks before he sadly passed
Yeah.
away earlier
Cheers.
this year,
Sure.
and he didn't want to tell that story. I don't.
Why?
I think because he didn't want to publicly. He told his story at conventions all the time, but I don't
Yeah,
think he
certainly.
wanted to record him making his boss look bad because the story does make his boss look
Yeah,
bad.
I would agree with that statement.
So the short version of the story, because I don't want it to, we've got your hour, and I don't want to waste your hour telling my story. But
No, no, this is a good story. Tell it.
so Jim was in charge at that point of a lot of fulfillment things, and he knew that in order to order the dice, it had a 3 month lead time because they had to order them from China, and the game started doing really well, and so he went to his bosses and said, "Hey, we're doing well. We should order dice because we're going to run out in about 6 months." And they said, "No, we're going to make our own dice because it costs too much to do this, and we're working on it now, and we'll have it figured out in 6 months." And he said, if we don't order 3 months ahead of time, we won't have any dice. And they said, "Jim, have a little faith. We're going to figure it out." So a month goes by, and then he has this long Shaggy Dog version of the story where he describes how the dice are developing. And at first they're just little black burnt popcorn at the bottom of a bag. And he asks his boss, "Can I order dice now?" And his boss is like, "Jim, don't be so negative. We're going to figure it out. This is just the first try." And the next month comes around, and the dice look like larger pieces of popcorn. Some of them different colors. They're not all black now. And
Oh,
he
that's
says,
nice.
"Oh, well, yeah, it's an improvement. Kind of order dice now." And he says, "No, Jim, stop it. I'm telling you, knock it off." Next month comes around. You can maybe see a number on a couple. There are now maybe sides on them, not 20 or the right number. And sometimes
Sure.
there's a number pressed on it, but that's it. And he asks again, and the boss says, "Jim, if you bring this up again, I'm going to fire you." And Jim says, "Can I get that in writing?" And he does. He gets a memo from his boss saying if he brings this up in a meeting again, he will be fired. And so he doesn't. And it comes along, and the dice improve a little and improve a little, and they go past the 3 month mark. But Jim doesn't bring it up again because he's told he cannot bring it up, and nothing. And 6 months pass, and they don't have anything close to usable dice, and they run out of dice. And suddenly there's a meeting saying, "We've run out of dice. Who's responsible for dice?" And someone says, "Well, Jim Ward's responsible for dice." And he gets pulled into the meeting and yells, "Jim, you're going to get fired. How can you let us run out of dice? We've got millions of orders now. We literally have millions of orders, and we can't do anything without dice." And he pulls out the memo. His boss said he brought this up 6 times and he can't bring it up again or he'd get fired. So he didn't get fired.
Mm.
But I think he thought that had a lot to do with why he got laid off when they had to target someone
Yeah,
because there were several people who were mad at him for making him look bad.
yeah, yeah. Well, it turns out Jim had the right amount of faith.
Yeah. Uh,
0.
yeah. So they made the chits for the 3 to 4 month period it took. They ordered it from China, and it took 3 months for the dice to get there. And it was just a time when sales were exploding. And so a
Yeah,
lot of chits went out into the
that's one way to phrase it. Yes. Yeah. Well, I didn't have that set. I had one with real dice. So apparently, I was prior to. I was an early adopter, um, because I had real dice, though not actually colored in. And so, it's probably worth actually setting the scene. I had. I was the boy in the basement. Um, uh, I had a in my house. I lived underground, but I could see the sky. There was a window that I could see the sky, and I had a little three-bedroom sort, not three-bedroom, three-room suite. I had a bedroom and a music room and a room that most kids would never have, which is just had a room with a giant table in it, like
nice.
bigger than a ping pong table, um, which I could have because no one else wanted to live in the basement. And so, um, and uh, and so at the head of this table was a set of airplane chairs. They literally had been pulled out of an airplane.
Okay.
Um, had they had they had what do you call them, ashtrays uh in them, right?
Be able to
Because all
smoke in
airplane
planes, yes?
Yeah, because all airplane chairs had ashtrays, and they were blue. They were light blue, and this was perfect because my friends, who were all 4 feet tall like I was, um, would come over and they'd sit at various points in this very large table, and I'd sit in the airplane chair as the dungeon master, again 4 feet tall, and um, I'd have next to me a chair in which I could put all the secret stuff that I would pull out, right? And they were like, "Oh my God, it's an owl bear or whatever," right? And um, and so I got sort of a taste for the theatrical of style of Dungeons and Dragons probably earlier than a lot of folks did,
Hmm.
right? How I ended up writing things like nonviolent modules and stuff like that was because I had basically sort of created this puppet show in my in my little underground lair. And yeah, well, I mean, there were actual people around me. I wasn't just performing to a crowd of one, but and it was super fun to to do that. It really sparked my imagination. It was definitely the first time I was ever in charge of anything. Right? I mean, as a kid,
So
and
how did someone give you the game as a
yeah,
gift?
yeah. My mom's boyfriend, who is now my stepfather, decided that I would like it, kind of sight unseen, because I read mostly his fantasy novels, um, and because I didn't have the money to buy fantasy novels, and so um, I yes, he gave it to me, and I had a large enough friend group to have 3 people over every week, right? And so, or 4 people, or whatever it was, and I mean, the stories of those games before I was 16 or 17, those are some of the most fun games I can remember, right? Because I was like, I was really trying to create something that was like a theatrical environment
Hmm.
without any of the constraints of I didn't yet have embarrassment. Right? I didn't yet, like I couldn't screw up in front of these guys, right? Like and so yeah, so right around age 14, 15, I don't know what it was. Um I was like, I could do this. I've reading what these people are writing in modules and magazines and
Right.
stuff like that. I'm that good. I
So
was not.
one
I
of
was
the things
not
that's
that
come
good.
up in a bunch of the
Yeah.
conversations is the moment when people realize, oh my God, someone's getting paid to make this thing.
Damn
Did,
right. Yeah. Yeah, I had that moment. I think the previous year I had sent in a crossword puzzle to Games Magazine or something like that. Because I was also making those and not realizing that there were, people who were just vastly better at it than I was. And so, but I was good enough to get published. And so I just basically said, at age, I'm guessing it was 15. I don't know for sure. I was like, I can do this. And so I sent stuff in and I didn't tell anybody how old I was, right? I mean,
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
bring it up. And
Why would you?
uh, it it turns out that that is the right call. And so they were like, "This is great." I think the first thing that got published actually was a crossword puzzle in Dragon Magazine. I'm pretty sure that was my first contribution to Dungeons and Dragons. But shortly after was the what I think is the last module in Dragon Magazine, which is Death of an Archmage,
Mm,
which is the first, which I think I can safely say is the first non-violent Dungeons and Dragons module. No, it's not non-violent. Sorry, not non-combat Dungeons and Dragons
mm,
module. Because the title tells you that everybody in this module is just vastly more powerful. And so you're a cop, and you have to investigate the death of an archmage, and you cannot fight your way out of the situation,
right.
right? You just can't. So you have to be smart enough and figure out your way through it. Anyway, I sent that in, and they loved it. But by this point, they had figured out how old I was because Kim Mohan, who we both know and love,
Mm,
is smarter than any of us. And it was like, "You're how old are you really?" And he's like, "I'm 16 years old." He's like, "Oh, well, that's fine. Let's see if we." And he basically served as, and I'm sure I'm the 40th person on your broadcast to say something like, "And Kim Mohan served as my mentor."
yeah.
Um,
Well,
right? I mean, that's got to be a common sentence here.
yes,
But he's
absolutely.
but yes, yeah, but the greatest editor of RPGs of all time served as my editor, or oh, sorry, as my mentor, and it turned me into a real boy. And so I put my I came to TSR for the first time when I was 17.
Where
Uh,
were you living? Where did you grow up?
Seattle, Seattle. I was born in Seattle, where we are now, and um, and I was planning to go, and I did go to Northwestern University in Chicago, in Evanston. So, and one of my favorite jokes is, how do you know someone went to Northwestern University? And the answer is, they'll tell you. And so, so I
A
fulfilled
similar thing can be said for the Ohio State University. But
yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, so prior to going out for school, I ended up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, for the Young Writers Conference.
hmm.
Uh, uh,
All right,
and it
hold
turned
on.
out,
Before you tell that story, I'm going to switch here because I talk
oh,
so
you're gonna
much.
switch.
We're now deeper into the hour than I might have thought. I'm going to start drawing
You
while
should
you
draw.
talk, um, and
What you gonna draw?
I'm drawing the evil player's companion, evil, you know,
Sorry, that is not the name of
elemental evil players.
that is
Huh?
really not the name of the book. The evil
Whatever.
player
Evil
companion.
players. Let's see. Bryce Whitaker says hello, Mike.
Hey, Bryce. Nice to meet you,
Mark
Bryce.
Jindra
Nice to see you.
says, "Look out! There's a shark next to me." Well,
It's
now he's
true.
above me.
Well, but yeah, no, that's actually where you want to be if there's a shark.
Yeah.
Um,
All right.
so
So
yes.
you went to the Young Writers.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And a bunch of people that you've heard of were at this conference, right? Among them, Lisa Stevens and other folks, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the way it worked was it was 2-day conference right before Gen Con. um, the I had been to Gen Con when I was 13 years old, but this was my return to Gen Con. Um, and so I was 17, and the um, the Young Writers Conference. Uh, there was a so we were met at the airport by Penny Petticord, now Penny Williams, who was the head of the RPGA, and we were brought to the to it's early in the morning or whatever. Maybe we came in the night before. I'm not sure. But anyway, we get brought to TSR, and it's like, oh, we go through the front door, and it's, oh my gosh, this is where the magic is made, right? And they sit us down in this conference room, and I sit at the 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 seat to the left of the head of the table, right?
Okay.
I'm not sure why I sit there, but that is where I get sat. And so I sit there, and Penny says, um, "We have an exciting thing to begin the Young Writers Conference, and this is a group of people who have already started to do things for D&D, but are clearly, too too green to be let outside, right? And so, um, and we have an exciting beginning to this. You're going to get a greeting from Gary Gygax, right? So this will tell you when it was. It was in 1985, but later in 1985, Gary Gygax leaves the building in a rather impressive way. So it's in the very last period that Gary Gygax is in the building as a head of the company person, and so um, anyway, the door swings open like one of those saloon doors in
Yeah.
West movie, right? Like just flies open, crashes against the side of the wall, and in comes Gary Gygax, who is
Mind
a
you, I did not force you to tell this story.
you said what? How did you get into the gaming
All right,
industry?
there you go. Okay, but I know where I've heard this story before.
Yeah. Well, I'll stop then.
No, no, I'm saying I just don't want you to say why did you make me say that in front of people.
Oh no, I never hesitate to say this story. I'm happy
Please,
to
because
tell.
I love this story.
Yeah, so the door swings open. Gary Gygax strides through the door. He's a big barrel-chested man. Like, I mean, you may have seen later pictures of him when he was older, but he wasn't older yet. And so he was, and he sits down right next to me, 17-year-old Mike Selinker,
Right.
right? And um and he says, "Young writers." I swear to God, I'm not making that up. Those are the first two words out of his mouth. It wasn't hello or anything like that. It was a declaration of who we were. And and he sits down in the chair, and he drops right next to me his skull mug, which is the most
Old mug.
impressive looking mug you've ever seen. It's like built out of King Kong's island, right? and and he drops it down on the table right next to me, and he starts saying, "Let me tell you about telling stories," right? And everybody is just wrapped with attention at what he is saying, but I am slightly distracted because I look down, and I want to point out that this story is approved by Luke Gygax for telling, in case anybody thinks otherwise. Um, and I look down because the mug that is next to me is not filled with coffee. It is filled with a clear liquid, and I realize very quickly it is not water. It is vodka. And you have to remember, I am 17 years old. And I look at this man who is pontificating on the greatness of role-playing games, story writing, and mechanical design, and he's got at 8:30 in the morning a skull mug of vodka in front of a bunch of teenagers and young, and I'm like, that that is what I want to be when I grow up. That right there is my future. Um, and it won't surprise you that Gary Gygax and I became close friends after that, because I was like, yes, I like I like this approach to life. Um, and so yeah, that's how I got in the door. The coda to that story is that I told it in front of the assembled gaming community at the Ennie Awards in some year. I've not forgotten what year, and Luke was there. And I didn't really know Luke that well. In fact, when I met him, he was a kid, so was I, right? Um,
Right?
and so I hadn't really interacted with him as an adult. And so I told that story, but Luke was a presenter in that Ennie Awards. Like he was literally off stage to my right, staring at me as I told this story. So I'm like, God, this could be the most embarrassing thing. I mean, it basically, am I saying something that he wouldn't want me to say? He comes up on stage right after me and gives me the biggest hug. It's like that's the best story I've ever heard about my dad. And I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God. But yes, so yeah, so that's how I got in the door. I ended up writing a huge amount of tournament scenarios that basically put me through college. The small amount of money that they paid me was enough to pay for books and my apartment and stuff like that. And then I helped out with a lot of products and so forth. And around I was one of the lead marshals. I guess I was the lead marshal for the RPGA. Basically, that meant I made sure that people got to play games they wanted to play. And then eventually, as I was doing serious work as a writer, I was a journalist and
Hmm.
I worked for Mayor Daley for a while. I guess there as the city of Chicago's research director, things like that. And but around 1995, I was like, oh man, I don't think I can cover hate crimes and gun violence forever. I liked doing that, don't get me wrong, but it was quite draining. And I was like, can I turn this thing that I do for extra money into all the money and
Right.
that I will get? And a little company in Seattle called Wizards of the Coast had just released a game called Magic the Gathering, and they were looking for somebody to come out, several somebodies as it turned out, to come out to build them an RPG division. Um, so Jonathan Tweet was the person who I'm sure is uh, frequently referenced in this series um,
Right.
of broadcasts. Has he been on, by the way?
Jonathan, I talked to Jonathan, and he's busy with a lot of other things and not working in gaming. And so while
Yeah.
he is aware of it and said nice things to me, he said he's right now he's not interested in being a
Well,
guest. But we're
this is a
we're certainly
direct
still talking for when he is interested,
this is a
presumably.
direct plea to Jonathan Tweet. You are required. You are needed here. Um,
I've had
bring.
a handful of people tell me that uh, thank you, I'd rather not, and I've there
I was
in
one of
no
them.
none of the cases, all of the cases I've wanted to say, oh please, but none of them have I. Right, but I
Yeah,
do check back every once in a while.
that's fair. That's fair. Well, I think it would be great if I came on, he could come on. So, but
Time to go
anyway,
up and say, Selinker threw down the gauntlet, man. You're challenged.
yeah, seriously. So, yes. So anyway, Jonathan was looking for somebody to work with him. Peter Atkinson, those guys. I came out with several of my friends. Tim Beach,
Mm-hmm.
um, the late Taylor Woodruff, and Wolfgang Bauer, and we built up a thing for Magic the Gathering. And then around, uh, I believe it was April Fool's Day in 1997, I got a call from David Eckelberry, my friend at TSR,
Mm-hmm.
who said, "Mike, what is going on?" And I was like, "David, what are you talking about?
Hmm.
It's April Fool's Day. What's going on?" He said, "There's people from your company all over my building."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah, That's interesting. I don't know anything about it. And I was dead serious. I did not know anything about it. So I immediately became someone who knew about it. I, I walked into Pete Atkinson's office, I think. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. And I said, tell me why there are people from our company in TSR. And he was like, well, okay, I can't tell you any, I can't tell you, but close the door. And so, anyway,
you
all
you
my friends.
didn't hear it from me, but come into my office.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, all the people who I knew at TSR suddenly showed up, basically, and stayed at my house. Right, like, not all of them, obviously, but a huge number of them suddenly just showed up, and said, "Where do I sit?"
Yeah,
And so I got to welcome a huge number of my friends to the company that I was at, and help acclimate them to this crazy new world of Seattle. I didn't know everybody, and I obviously met you at that
yeah.
point. Um,
Can I just jump back a little bit? Um,
sure.
One of the things that's come up in a number of conversations, and you've talked about a bit, sometimes uh, in a side hand way here, is the RPGA and what it did, which is kind of a role
Yes.
that doesn't exist anymore. And you did a lot of work with.
Yeah. And it does give me an opportunity to talk about something I really wanted to mention. That's a good point, and thank you. The RPGA, Role Playing Game Association, has had several incarnations, but the sort of foundational incarnation was, they made a decision at TSR that what they wanted was a thing where they could hold gaming events, um, and have them in a somewhat organized fashion, what we would later call organized play. And they realized that people would come to conventions to do that. And they already were coming to conventions to do that, just to be clear. They just wanted to do it in a fashion where they could sort of track it and influence it and so forth. And they came up with this idea to give out a point system, for playing in a game that has no point,
Right.
right? Like,
In a game
it's
that
important.
doesn't have winners or losers.
Exactly, right. It's just like, how do you do that? And it turned out that what they did is they just designed a series of levels, that makes sense, Dungeons and Dragons, right? Levels. And they let you vote at the end of the event for who was the best role player at the table. And the judge got 2 votes, and everybody else got 1 vote.
Mm.
And there was some period where you could vote for yourself, and some period where you couldn't vote for yourself. Uh, and this was incredibly suited to 17-year-old Mike Selinker. Just, I mean, like, you could not have designed something. I was a mathematical person. I min-maxed everything in my life. Uh, and also, I was a not a, I was going to say dramatist, but that's the wrong word. I don't know. I was a ham. Um, right? Like, I liked the idea of
You were
being
an
on.
amateur thespian.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. And so, um, uh, this was a circumstance under which I could get rated functionally to be as out there a role player as I could possibly be. And and this worked for a lot of people. And so, I quickly became, oh God. Okay, so so there were levels, and first, I don't know what first level was. Let's call it novice. But this third level was masters, and third and fifth level was grandmaster, and seventh level was paragon.
Hmm.
And Paragon was basically as high as you could be. I mean, technically there were 10 levels, but Gary Gygax was only 8 as a player, let's be clear, and he was grandfathered in. And so it was really mathematically built to be very difficult to be a Paragon in either a judge or a player position, because the judge was also rated by the players. So, I was the pretty sure I'm the first person to be both. I was the first person to become a paragon in both player and judge. I don't know if that's true, but I believe it to be true. Um,
It's
and
either
so
true or true adjacent.
it's true. It's at least true adjacent, right? Exactly. And so, because I really loved entertaining people in both sides of the glass, right? And so yeah, you people around me were the best role players of all time. Like the people we have now are great, right? The people who are doing live broadcasts and stuff like that, they're great. But at that time, if you wanted the best role players in the world, they were
Hmm.
sitting at those tables. And so 18, 19, 20-year-old me had to, keep pace with them. And one of those people, and the reason I said thank you for bringing that up, it was Jim Wade. Um, Jim was sort of an anchor level judge for the RPGA. He was
Mm.
and a player, right? And he's just one of the centerpieces of that. And he was a little older than I was. And he was he and I got real close, and I ended up being his roommate and best friend. He passed away this week,
Mm. Yes, I'm
and
very sorry. I was very sorry to hear
yeah, it was rough. I mean, he'd been sick for a while, and that brought out all the people who of that particular era, right, who were like, oh no, like, and sort of reminded us. I was going back through all the Polyhedron was the magazine of the RPGA,
that. Hmm.
and all the modules that I wrote ended up being in that magazine. Like they published them because they paid for them, right? And so they would, and there was ones by me and Jim together, one called A Friend in Need, which was just, I mean, I don't like to say my stuff is brilliant, but this was Jim's idea, and it was great. It was the story of a forest and it was all fairy tale creatures, like a centaur and a sylph and a so forth, trying to save a dryad from essentially being accidentally kidnapped by a prince who she was in love with, but you can't take a dryad away, right?
Right.
Like it was that kind of story. And it was heart wrenching, but also hysterical. Um, and so anyway, Jim and I flew all over the country and in some cases the world to basically be the among the spotlight people for these games. I mean, there were times when these games were held. We didn't have cameras then. There were times when these games were held on stages in the middle of a gaming hall, built stages, right? Like, and people would stand around or sit around and just watch us role play. And I'm pretty sure that's the first time that ever happened, right? I mean, like, I
Right.
don't
Now
think
that's
that,
kind of a common. Now people are making
yeah,
their living
exactly,
doing that.
exactly. But I'm pretty sure we were the first people that anyone watched role play ever. And so, it was a heady time. It was centered around a place in Milwaukee called the Safe House. We would all go there. It was a spy themed bar. I ended up getting my wedding reception was held there. Jim was the best man,
Mm.
and so yeah, it was a good time. And I met, and really importantly, I met everybody, right? Everybody who worked for TSR in that period of time um, came through the RPGA or ran games. I mean, Dave Arneson ran games for us. Gary's table multiple times. Um,
Mm.
just every, Frank Menser, Skip Williams, all these people were, you know, they were right there the whole time. All this foundational stuff happened, and I was the kid in it, right? My role was I was I was the point of view character, right? The
Right.
inexperienced point of view character, right? Who has to have everything explained to them. That's a great role for being able to tell the stories later. So, yeah, that was a great time. And
One of the things that comes up when we talk about the RBGA that's so different, as you say, it really it, it was you weren't bringing your own character at that point. You were handed
that's right.
pre-generated characters.
This this does not exist. This is a kind of play style that was invented for something called the AD&D Open in about 1983, I'd say, something like that. I could be
Mm.
wrong, but um, and the idea was that to make everything fair, if you were going to rate people by their, you know, who won, um, originally it was just to be like teams. The AD&D Open was a team event.
Right.
You got right. So your six players were going to go through the same dungeon that everyone else went through, and to make sure that you didn't have an advantage, they had to give you a character. That is, you got an 18th level paladin or whatever, and you got to play that paladin. And you didn't get to choose which character you played. That wasn't a thing. You were just handed to them. Maybe in the team events you got to decide who played who. That might have been true. But regardless, you didn't get to make your own characters. And so you had to on the spot learn the character. Bang. Right? And there was no half hour preparation time. It
Mm.
was just like, right. It was just like, okay, we're going, and you got. I think you got maybe like 5 minutes to read the character, synthesize what it did, understand. So you had to know the mechanics of the game cold. And by the way, we played more than Dungeons and Dragons. We played at least 20 different game
Yeah.
systems, and so you had to know all those game systems completely cold. And so um, and then when they introduced the sort of role playing centered elements of it, where it wasn't just run through the dungeon and do the best you can, but now we're going to tell stories and play characters, the descriptions of the character became very long, right? It was like, okay, now there's a 4 page or 4 paragraph description of who you are and your relationship to all the other characters. So essentially, you were handed a a role that you had to play, right? I
Right.
mean, like literally role playing on the spot performance art for 4 hours. Um, and it was quite an incubator. I mean, we um, uh, one of the things that distinguished people who could really do this and people who couldn't was just the ability to take what was on the page, because you knew that every other person knew a summary of what was on your page, so you couldn't just make it up,
Right.
right? You had to nail it, right? uh, and invent the persona that most matched that and then run with it without any cracks for 4 hours, right?
Right.
Uh, And so, to win one of these high level tournaments, you didn't get any time to prepare for it. And so it was really a very special way to play. It's like these live plays that you see today if none of the actors had any idea what they were going to do before they walked in the door.
Right.
It's like if you took the network dropout and you combined the D&D shows they do with Make Some Noise and the other, the sort of improv comedy stuff, right?
Right.
Like it's both of those. And it's improv dramatic arts. And yeah, we were um, the people there who came out of that. Many of them went on to big things in the gaming industry, right? Jay Tummelson founded the Rio Grande Game Company that
Mm.
made made all the board games in 1995 and on, right? I mean, Lisa Stevens founded Paizo. Um, Don Bingle and Linda Bingle founded Pace Setter. Um, the just, I mean, we were, the closest you got to a blueprint for what was going to happen in gaming after that point, because we just went through this crucible that was really exciting, and we met everybody. We got introduced to everybody. Like, people would come to our games like that weren't in this, and they say, "Oh, will you do a thing for me? Because I'd love to have you involved." Like, it was just it was the weirdest kind of networking event you could possibly imagine. um, and so yeah, it was really a special time, and it really prepped me well for being what happened to me afterwards, where I got, where people were foolish enough to call me creative director and stuff like that, because it was, I got some training.
Right.
Um, I mean, like, people would turn to me and say, like I was the uh, it was not surprising that I occasionally was the party leader at at Wizards of the Coast or something like that, because I was the party leader at 17 years old, you know, at a table with Gary Gygax.
Right.
Right? That's not that's those things aren't unconnected, right? So yeah, it was a time.
All
And
right.
yeah,
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead.
By the way, look how far you've gotten.
Uh,
Like, I mean, you're ripping through this thing.
that's how it goes. Well, I mean, we're now 45 minutes in, so
But I mean,
you
like
so before we started, you
that guy
asked.
has eyebrows already.
Well,
Yeah.
thankfully, someone did a whole bunch of work on this before I did.
That's one way to look at it. That is very funny. It is it's like you don't have to worry about where his left arm is.
Right.
Right? Like, you never have to think, should he be should he be
How
raising
should
his
he pose? No, no, he's like that.
yeah, nope. He's like this. Like this. Yeah, that's totally right. So I suppose it would be a lot faster. So yeah. Um oh, I see some nice people in the chat. Those people
Right.
are very cool. Yeah, you
Yep.
guys.
Yes, yes,
Um
yes.
so
Chris Andrew says, "I'm one of
I
the
know.
people that will watch others play RPGs." So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, too bad we didn't have cameras on us at the time. I say without any
He
desire
also
to have
says,
had cameras.
"This image reminds of when his wife commands him to take out the garbage."
Is there usually a giant hawk-like creature in the background bearing down on you at the time? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up anything. So, uh, so
All
yeah.
right. So yes,
Uh,
but we're not. So I pulled you back. You were starting to talk about when people
I
from.
was starting to talk about you,
Okay. Well, go ahead.
and you
Please
were
tell
like,
me
I
about
don't want
me.
to do that. You're like, I don't want to do that. I want to talk about you. That's all fine. No, that was when, yeah, I was mentioning it was like 1997. All you guys show up, right? And it's like all of a sudden, oh, it was so funny too. Um, so when I was so the 2 years that I was at Wizards of the Coast before TSR was acquired, um, I was in the trading card game division, and I could definitely, I could handle myself among that crowd. But
Right.
I was the story guy. I was the guy you could bring in as like, okay, so what's the rationale for these characters doing what they're doing, right? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you, let's dream out loud together, right? Um, you guys show up, right? And they're like, so I was working on battle tech and stuff like that, giant robot tanks stomping around. And uh, Peter Atkinson brings me into his office, having
Mm,
completed the acquisition of TSR, and was like, I need to talk to you about this. I'm like, okay. We have a long discussion about personnel and how it fits in our culture and all that kind of stuff. And he says, so what do you want to do? I was like, I want to work on my giant robot tanks. I want to keep doing
mm.
trading card games. I like what I'm doing. I like my job. Um, And he was like, "Yeah, but see, I just bought this giant company, and I need somebody to come over and do stuff in that company, and then and you and I'm like, but I did RPG stuff. I want it, and fine." He said, what if I give you Spider-Man?" I said, "What now?" He said, "Well, they got a Marvel license and they don't have a game for it." And I'm like, "You want to just give me Spider-Man?" And I'm like, it's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I'll do that. Right? Like, so I kissed my friends in the trading card game division goodbye, and literally walked to the other side of the wall because literally the two were separated by one
Yeah.
wall, and was like, "Hi, I'm your new friend." To all these people who came out from TSR who didn't know anybody else but their own clique, right? I mean, like,
Right.
for the most part, none of you had knew any of the people in the building you just showed up in, right? Um, and I could speak your language, right, in a way that lots of other people couldn't.
I mean,
Um,
that's a big skill. I say that kind of skill has served me well throughout my career.
yeah,
Coming
yeah,
into the editorial and being able to talk art to the art
yeah,
director.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So all of a sudden I come in there, right? It's become apparent that to everyone that Wizards has bought TSR because it wants to reboot Dungeons and Dragons. It wants to do a new edition of the game, which I don't know that everybody in the room was completely excited about. But
So I mean, that's
that
certainly a that's a it's a weird thing because I've had you on. I had Peter on. I've had
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
Monty and Steve Winter on, and the number of people who were at different points, at that same point, were all angling towards it's time to reboot this game, and
yeah,
they all met in Renton and exploded.
yeah. No, for sure. It's funny because I'm basically brought in. I get um, assigned to the wonderful Sue Weinman,
Hmm.
who I know you had on here, basically because I can't be trusted by myself, which is the right call. And and I'm just brought in, um, and the most hysterical thing happens. I'm now the math guy. Like I was the guys in trading card RNG were all math guys. They couldn't tell a story necessarily. Like they could, but some of them
Right.
could, right? Mark could, right? But for the most part, it was filled to the brim with people who could analyze probability, right? Which is really important
Right.
skill in trading card game design, right? But if you're going to rebuild Dungeons and Dragons, you also need a lot of probability knowledge. Like you need the ability to understand the effects of your actions, you know,
Right.
and so and all of a sudden I could be like, well, no, actually, what you want it to do is go this direction, work like this. And people were like, oh my God, what kind of wizardry is that? I'm like, it's day 5 of a calculus textbook, whatever, like uh, so anyway, point being, we got in, we got into this room where again, not everybody knew each other, and especially the folks from TSR didn't really know any of the folks from Wizards. They didn't know Scath, they didn't know Robert Gutierrez, they didn't know
Mm.
those folks, but they all kind of knew me, right? Like most of them knew me, and so I was like in this weird spot where, um, how to phrase this? Uh, where if I said something, I was one of the few people who could talk to everybody in the room,
Right.
not necessarily as an equal, right? That wasn't the case, but like, yeah, I was a weird kind of translator guy,
That's what I
right?
was about to say. What you could perform was the linguistic translate. You could make sure that
Yeah,
what was said was understood.
yeah, and not, like all the people in this room are alphas, right? So they could immediately come to blows over just about anything, right? And so, we go around and we start talking about it, and I say the following sentence, and it becomes one of the two defining principles of the contradictory principles that can guide this revision. I say, if you do nothing but make armor class go the other direction, you will have done the Lord's work. Um, and that sentence was essentially to say, this is a Hippocratic process. We're going to fix what we need to fix. We're going to make it better, but we're not going to change. the essential nature of Dungeons and Dragons that currently exists in the second edition Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or what it may not have had the A at that point. I don't
Right.
remember. Um, it had the A. That's right. And then the other principle that was espoused was we make the game of the future. We leave behind anything that holds us back from that principle. This became an incredibly contentious discussion.
Right.
Um, uh,
That part I remember.
sure, yeah, exactly. Like I remember people coming out of this discussion saying functionally the following sentence: "This group of people can't work together." Right? Like just straight up. Right now, other people may remember it differently. I don't know. This is what I remember. Um, and I was like, no, no, those are natural. Those are natural competing forces in any sort of design process. We've been through this before. You've been through this before. We're going to end up we've got really great people in Jonathan Tweet, Monty Cook, Skip Williams, Scaff Elias, Rich Baker. You know, the people who are being assigned to helm this process are gonna nail it. The people who are gonna help them with that are the best in the world at helping them in that. Right? I mean, like everybody involved is A game material, and we're just gonna get it over the line. And that happened, right? I mean, like I never thought I was gonna be wrong about that. Because I looked out at that room and I saw a whole lot of people who were really, really good at what they were doing, and I was just happy to be in them. And when I got whatever position of authority I had, my goal was not to screw it up,
Right.
right? Like the, the goal of a creative director should be that there are creatives, and you make sure that they get to create.
Right. They,
And
they, they,
so,
I've always thought that as in that role, my goal is to make sure that you're doing the best thing you can do, not the best thing I
yeah,
can do.
yeah, exactly. I mean, um, I hope that most of these people were really nice. You know, like the people who were in charge were not mean. They weren't, right. I mean, like Sue wasn't gonna screw that up. Uh, Ed wasn't gonna screw that up,
Right.
right? Um,
Ed,
uh,
who was in the chat at least earlier, he may still be here.
yeah, exactly. Um, and yeah. No. Oh, I see. There's a comment in the chat I should probably answer. Which is how I got my job at Wizards. Pre TSR. Um, there was an application sent out, or I don't know, whatever, a job opportunity sent out that was for a game designer to helm. Well, I don't know if helm because Jonathan Tweet was there, but to
Mm.
I don't know, be whatever, to to be a leader in RPGs. And I was like, no, that you can't do that. And I called them up, and I said, if you want to do what I think you want to do, which is knock TSR off its throne, um, you need a team of designers, and I know who that is, and I will bring it out to you. And so Wolf and me and Taylin um, and Tim went out and said, "You need to hire all of us." And we looked good. We were in suits. Uh, it was in a dress. We
Where
uh,
was this advertised?
I don't know. It got
Or
to me.
where did you hear about it? They sent you a letter, you say?
They they asked me. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Basically, I don't know. Maybe Tim found out about it first. I'm not really sure. Because I didn't know Jonathan at that point. Um, even though he was a Augustana boy from the Midwest, we didn't know each other. And
Teowin did though,
but
right? Through White Wolf stuff. Did,
maybe through White Wolf, that might have been the way. Actually, now that you mention it, that might have been the way. Teowin might have had a connection to Jonathan through White Wolf. That sounds right. Um,
this is why
and
I'm
so
a
the
good
four
host.
Yeah, seriously. And so the four of us were like, no, if we're going, if any of us are going, we're going as a group. They have to realize
Right.
that. And so because what the task they want to do is not a one person job. And yeah, so we all came out together, and we had our tumultuous period. There was a big layoff at Wizards, and we
Mm.
were all just like, and all that. But we ended up being, like Wolf came over to the RPG side when TSR was bought. Um, did a great job over there. And I mean, the people who let us do this were also not all TSR folks, right? Ryan Dancy, was from Legends of Five Rings, from Alderac Entertainment. Um, and I mean, just like it was very much a different team, even though it included a lot of TSR folks. And I was just one of the people. I was the only one in the building who knew the answer to, in the Wizards of the Coast building, who knew the answer to the question, who at TSR is great? And the answer I gave was pretty much everybody, right? Like I was
And
like, I went through, I had some opinions about who should come out, who shouldn't, right? I had strong opinions about that, but fundamentally, I thought there was a whole bunch of questions around what had happened at TSR, which I don't have any interest in going into because I didn't know
right.
it at the time,
Right.
right? But in terms of like brand diffusion and stuff like that, but on a creative level, just like it was the best. You could not have imagined hiring a better crew,
Right.
and so I got the opportunity to sort of seamlessly integrate with that crew for a few years. I
All right. I'm going to
um,
pause a quick second there because
yeah.
I'm going to stop drawing now. Those of
Oh,
you who've been watching, this is where I'm going to
there's
leave
a
my sketch
this
for this.
it's
I
really
will finish it offline. If you want to be among the first people to see it, then you should be a subscriber to our free newsletter, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com. That means that you get to see these as soon as they're done, usually a week or more before I release them for the public. And plus all the other behind the scenes stuff that I put in the newsletter. So sign up free, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com. And then you and
cool.
I will take up the whole screen again.
Oh, look at us. Look at us. How about that? Chris asks what I think was my favorite contribution or innovation
Hmm.
to the hobby that I made during my time at TSR Watson.
There's a lot of choices there. So here's the other thing:
Yeah.
we're now at an hour, which
Oh,
we don't have to hurry out, but we're gonna begin the wrap up point, which
yeah. We should talk about we're still in the previous century.
yeah. What would you like the last segment of the
Let me answer Chris's question. Or let me try to answer Chris's question, and how I get out of TSR or out of Wizards of the Coast, right? So that's covered. Um, I was ready to leave RPGs after um, third edition came out because it was the best thing that I was ever going to do in the RPG world. Period.
mm,
I mean, there's just no question about that, right? You can't follow that up. That was, and I don't even think of it as mine, right? Obviously, there's dozens of people who made that thing happen, and the small part I played in it, I was never going to do better than that, ever. Um, and so, uh, I was like, okay, I'm out the door. Thanks everybody. This was great. And because I'd done the Marvel Superheroes adventure game with you and Sue and everybody else, right? Michelle, Carter,
well, we only
all those.
we that's a thing that you had started to talk about. And then we kind of segued off that in itself could be an hour talk.
Oh, I love that. That's still got my favorite product I've ever designed in it, which is the Reed Richards Guide to Everything, where Reed Richards answers the
Yeah,
questions of children. And the questions are like, why did the dinosaurs go extinct, Mr. Richards? And he says, they didn't. They're alive and well in the Savage Land. Anyway, so
yeah.
super fun. Loved everything about it. So I was ready to go, and they were like, no, we're not ready for you to go. And I was like, well, what are you going to do to make me stay? And they said, well, we're going to give you Avalon Hill. And I'm like, oh God, I can't say no to that. And so I got to reboot Avalon Hill, do the first new release of the first revision of Axis and Allies ever,
Mm,
right? Made Risk Godstorm with Mike Danae and Rich Baker. Launched uh, Betrayal at House on the Hill was a
mm-hmm.
game that we developed. I very much enjoyed making that game. Um, and then I was absolutely done. Then I was like, I can't do better than this. I'm out. And founded a little company called Lone Shark Games, which was in 2003 with James Ernest.
Mm-hmm.
Teowin came and joined us a year and a half later, which was great. Um, Tyler Beelman worked with us for a little while, who's also a big part of that whole scene. And um, it's 20 years later, and in that period of time, Lone Shark is still around, and we've made
Mm-hmm.
lots of games. We made the Pathfinder Adventure card game, which is another weird extension of Dungeons and Dragons. Um, Pathfinder, I'm sure you had Eric Mona on here, right?
Had Eric
Uh,
Mona last week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they know about Pathfinder, and Pathfinder. We made the Pathfinder Adventure card game, which was a totally different way to play an RPG,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where created the concept of the living card game idea, which I think is still holding strong. Um, and That
I'll
was
tell you
super
one of the
fun.
things the Pathfinder card game, um, even without going into details about it, and falling back to the when we first came over to when the two companies merged, there were a bunch of people from Card RPG who kept coming over and telling us that the the best way to do a storytelling game, the best way to do a role playing experience was cards. That this whole kind of books and dice and that wasn't it. And
Yeah,
we laughed at them a lot. But
you
so
noticed I wasn't one of the people who was laughing at
right,
the time.
the idea of there being a way to do that, like would say, how do you do that? No one really had an answer, and it wasn't until the Pathfinder uh, card game, the adventure card game, that you came out that showed me the answer to that question of how do you
Yeah,
merge those two things into a game.
that's right. I had some idea of the answer to that question um, earlier on, but I realized it was never going to fly at Wizards. I was never going to merge those two. Obviously, I also did try to go the other way. I tried several times to make a Magic the Gathering role playing game, and that failed in every possible way, um, because there
Got
were
lots of
people who did.
stories about that I don't talk about
did
on
nah,
this.
those are all the bad stories. I don't want to tell but no, I mean, so yes, I definitely knew that there was a sense. I thought there were a group of people called lapsed role players,
Mm,
people who were role players in spirit, but without portfolio. They didn't have people around them that wanted to role play. They didn't have 4 hours, 6 hours of their life every week to give to a thing. There was no way they were um, going to buy supplement after supplement that they were never going to play. Right? It was just for them, the role playing hobby was a dead end, but they loved it. And so I was like, we're going to get all of those people. Every single one of them is going to get a shot at this game. And I'll be honest, that's not what happened. The vast majority of people who played the Pathfinder Adventure card game had never played a role playing game. They were just people who liked card games, and
right.
this was a game that it was like, but this game had story. This game had character development. This game had progression. This game had all sorts of things. And they were like, "Wait, there's a role playing game based on this?" Right? Like,
Right.
no, not so much, but thank you for coming to my TED talk, right? Like, come in the door,
Right.
and so I think we made a lot of role players weirdly with the Pathfinder Adventure card game, which was not the intent.
That I mean that
And
doesn't surprise me either because one of the things that comes up a lot when trying to explain role playing game to people who don't do it. One of the tacks I will use is board games where you invest your non narrative token with a story and a life and a voice.
all the
Like
time.
people who play Monopoly and the dog wants to get a certain street because it's where whatever, right? They
Yeah,
people have always done this. They just don't know they want to play role playing games.
exactly. Yeah, from the moment they pick up the car in Monopoly and make vroom vroom
Right,
sounds, they're a
right.
role.
So having a card game that is even more linked back is just a way of opening the door for those people,
I
even if
think
that
it did
wasn't
work.
the intent of it.
It wasn't, but it definitely happened, and that was a huge success. It was a great game to work on. We've sort of become a company that just makes these really big box, fascinating story games that are beautifully illustrated, and I love that about what we do. It's not all of what we do, and it's often kind of exhausting work, but
Mm,
it's exciting because we get to play with these really big picture stories. Apocrypha, which was our second adventure card game, had 666 pieces of brand new art in it, and so it was just like, let's illustrate everything we could ever
mm,
imagine about horror in a modern day universe, right? And got to work with Monty Cook again on the Ninth World,
mm,
which is a board game we made out of Numenera. Super fun. We made Thornwatch, which was um, based on a world that Mike Krahulik and Jerry Holkins at Penny Arcade
mm.
created off there, and so it's just been a good. And we've gotten to do novels, we've gotten to do books of all kinds, puzzles, lots of puzzle stuff, and it's just been a good run, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
we we've had a we've had the opportunity to do a lot of cool things, and a lot of them. Oh, I will point out, not a fair number of them have involved Stan. You don't know how much time I've spent with you the last few months. Um,
Well,
I've
I
spent a
remember the
lot more
last
time with you.
conversation we had. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I've spent more time with you than you know about. Because we're producing a book. I said Loan Shark's been around for 20 years. We're producing a book called The Hunting of the Shark, which is a book of all the puzzle hunts that we made over that period, a large number of the puzzle hunts we made over that period of time, which is a lot. It's over 300 pages long, full color, but a bunch of them were illustrated by you. Um, you show up all over the place. You turn the corner, there's a bunch of new aliens drawn by Stan. Here's some, here's some ninjas. Here's a monkey, whatever, right? Like, and like, look, that's a monkey, and Stan drew it. And so it's super fun to go back through all this stuff. I was like, okay, we gotta and so yeah, a lot of that stuff is you. So you've had a strong influence on us, which is great.
and proud to have done it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh,
thank
what's the
Agile. Is
question
that
about?
Agile Monk? Sorry, wow. The prints that white on gray is hard to read. Thank
Yeah.
you. Who's the first time joining? Thank you for joining. Says, how has the Ninth World game been?
Oh, it was great when it came out. I mean, like I will say, a lot of our games are like they have two really good years, and then they become sort of evergreens after
Right.
that. And but it did really well. It was really cool because the Numenera players would come up to us and say, "You captured it in a game in a game that takes a half hour, right?" Like, I mean, I mean, my dear friends at Monte Cook Games make great things, but they are not short, right?
No, that's
They,
what they're aiming for.
yeah, they are. They make deep, enriching, vast experiences, and we love that about them. And we were just like, yeah, but what if it was like bite-sized? And so, um, the Ninth World was a thrill to work on because first off, we get to use all the art that they had.
Hmm.
They're beautiful, right? And we introduced them to a bunch of our artists, which now work for them, which is great. But also, it was just like Paul Peterson and Boyan Radakovich just created a really brilliant basis for the game. And the funny thing about it was they came to me with this game. They're like, "We think you're really gonna like this game." And I was like, "Yeah, I really do." And I have some theories, and they're like, "Yeah, we want you to be a co-designer." And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to do that." And they said, we set it in Numenera, but we know there's no way we can do that. So let's figure out what this game is really about. I said, "What do you mean there's no way we can do that?" Bink, 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 bink. Charles Ryan. I call him up. I was like, "Charles, hey Mike, if I had a way to make a game about Numenera and I could ship it over to you by the end of the day, and would you look at it today?" He was like, "Absolutely." And so I sent it to him, and at the end of the day, he's like, "Let's do this game." And so I call Bo and Paul back, and I'm like, "We're doing a Numenera game." And he's like, "Yeah, but like, what is it really going to be?" I'm like, "Will you stop it? We're doing a Numenera game. Put aside all other thoughts on that subject." And so, yeah. Now, I didn't really know much about it, so like they would have a creature, and I would say, I wouldn't remember what it was called, so I'd be like, "And now you fight a gun crab." It's like it's not called a gun crab. I'm like, it's a crab, but it's got a gun on it,
It's
right? Like,
crap.
you know, I wasn't too concerned with details, but yeah, the Numenera players really liked it. They they
You
they
and
wrote
George
articles.
Lucas, right? George Lucas doesn't.
Yeah,
George Lucas drives uh, Bill Slavicsek crazy by not using the words, the real
right.
words. Right?
I
It's
don't. Yeah,
Walrus
yeah.
Man. It's Walrus Man.
I was like, there's a crab with a gun on its face. I'm fine with that. So that was the great thing about that universe too. Is it's just like there was no reason to explain anything. It was a billion years in the future. Why tell you the backstory of
It's
why this thing happened? It happened because a billion years happened, and now crabs have guns on their face. Like that's totally fine, right?
yeah.
Or maybe it's its claw. I can't remember. Um, anyway, it was super fun. I think when we make a game, we really just try to be a part of that world. And so, like Apocrypha is one of those deep dive games where it's just like we want it to feel like it's in your world. And so we just try really hard to immerse ourselves so that we can immerse you.
Hmm.
And I got a lot of that from working with you guys, right? Where it was just like story isn't like a thing you put on afterwards.
Right.
Story is the reason, right? Story is why we are here. And mechanics matter, and I'm a good mechanical designer, right? But I want to know what story we're telling.
Right.
And I think I kind of got that from my time, working with you guys and just how passionate, like again, people like Sue and Ed and folks like that,
Hmm.
and you were about just, no, this is why we're doing this. And I just really like that approach to the world, right? And so, uh, as we make new games, um, we we always try to carry that forward as if we were still in the TSR building,
Yeah.
right? So,
All right. So before we completely wrap up, I do want to do what I do at the end of every conversation and say, hey,
okay,
this is the 50th anniversary. We've
50
now looked.
years.
I know we've looked from the beginnings in the 70s with the chits instead of the dice
Yeah, yep,
to
yep.
a billion years in the future.
Yes, that
We've
is
covered a
exactly what
lot of
we talk.
ground here, but we're
We talk
looking
about
at
everything in
this
between.
this 50th anniversary. What is it when I mentioned that that's the theme for this? What does that bring to you? What do you think about as we're on this as a
I
thing to
think,
mark?
and I've said this publicly, other than my parents, Dungeons and Dragons has been the single most powerful cultural force on my life, right? Just in terms of shaping me as a a creative, as a consumer of culture, as a participant
Mm.
in the world. I don't think there's anything that has done more. Now I've done 7 Marvel games. So Marvel's like up there, right?
Right.
You know, like there are things comic books are I should say comic books in general are up there, right? But I don't think anything, comic books are flat, right? I mean like you're not a participant in the comic, right? Um Movies are flat, right? You're not a
Yeah.
participant in the cinematic universe, right? Dungeons and Dragons, you're a participant. You're in it. And I don't think that's going away ever. I
Right.
mean ever. Like like if Ready Player One is to be believed, which it should not be believed, but if like we're just gonna keep doing this, right, for the rest of time, long after I'm gone.
Right.
Uh, and and it's not always gonna be like the great thing about Dungeons and Dragons. I've said this and it makes people crazy. Dungeons and Dragons is like gospel music. um, it adapts to whatever
Mm.
form you bring to it, right? You can make any musical genre into gospel
Mm.
because gospel is just it absorbs whatever it is you need it to be, and that doesn't mean that it's always good. It just means that it's always what you need it to be if you come in. And other
Right.
genres, other things that we do, they don't play as nice with other things, right? But Dungeons and Dragons plays well with everything.
Mm.
No matter what it is you want to do as a game designer. I mean, like I said, I made this card game, and it wasn't a Dungeons and Dragons game. It didn't have to be a Dungeons and Dragons. But the stories that Dungeons and Dragons tells were perfect for this card game, and I
Mm.
didn't want to do it. Obviously, I did it with Pathfinder, which isn't literally Dungeons and Dragons, but for the purposes of this discussion, it's a form of that, and uh, and I think that's just going to keep happening. I
Mm.
think no matter what the form factor is of the product we are making, we are going to keep making this product.
Yeah.
We are going to keep, we will change, the people will change, but um, we will keep, people will keep wanting us to do this.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes we'll do it better than other times. Sometimes we'll make mistakes. Sometimes we'll choose the wrong direction. Sometimes we'll irritate our audience. Sometimes but we'll always have it. We'll always have the audience. Um, and the stories that we tell are the best stories. We get to tell them because you're in them.
Mm.
And so I once one of the things I got to do with Apocrypha was I got to get Pat Rothfuss and Jerry Holkins and Kids Johnson and Bruce Cordell and Chris Straub, all the Keith Baker, all the authors that I knew that were just the best. And I said, this is functionally it's an RPG in a card form, right? And I was like, I want you to write the stories for this. And then when I say that, they immediately recoil, right? Because it's like, oh my God, that sounds like a really big project. I was like, wait, let me tell you what I want you to do. I want you to write the middle of every story. I don't want you to write the beginning. The beginning is the players, where the player comes from. That's them, right? I don't want you to write the end. The end is what the player resolves. I just want you to write that good bit in the middle. The thing that says, while we're here, this is what we're doing. And every author loves to do that. They came out of the woodwork to do that. And functionally, that's what we do. We write the juicy bit in the middle.
Yeah.
We write the part that says, we know you bring yourself to the table, and we know you're going to resolve what it is you do. But we're going to give you the thing that you can hang that on. And you can morph it into whatever you want. People are going to keep asking us to do that forever because that's the cool bit. That's the part that's fun to write. And so I can't wait to see what the next group of people does and the group of people after that. And as long as I'm around,
Mm,
to see what it is, I'm gonna keep wanting to play it. My favorite edition of Dungeons and Dragons is always gonna be the next
mm.
one. And so I I I I couldn't be more optimistic. Couldn't be more optimistic. I don't know that it involves the people who currently make the game. I don't know if it becomes under some other name functionally. There was a period of time where it was Call of Cthulhu or something else, right? That made people go, or for that matter, even Magic the Gathering. Um, but I think at its core, there's a reason this lasted 50 years, and it's gonna last another 50 and 50
Mm.
after that. That's
All
my
right.
take.
Well,
I
there
don't
you
know.
go.
I've been wrong. I've been wrong before, but I think I'm right about this
I think one of the challenges that Hasbro has is that D&D is just what you're saying. Is that no matter what they do, people are going to keep playing D&D, and
one. Yeah.
exactly what it is may not be what the company wants to sell.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I just don't care.
But that's
Look,
yeah. No, I'm not
yeah,
saying that like it's a problem.
and just to be clear, I don't mean that I don't care about what decisions Hasbro makes. I do care about that. I care only because the players. I don't care only because the players will always have the tools to make it themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? They will always have the way to say, "Hey, let's get together and play," regardless of what edition they have, regardless of what that tool set is. There's literally no way to turn the tap off.
right.
Right? There's always a way. You can stop people from playing a computer game. All you have to
And we've
do is
seen
make it
that.
impossible. Right. All you have to do is make it impossible for them to play. Right? That's not terribly hard. It's real hard to turn off Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons. You can't turn that switch off because we got it already. And so um, I am not concerned about any decisions that anybody in the process makes. I really respect the people at Wizards of the Coast who are making decisions.
mm,
The people who are many of whom are my close friends. And I really respect the folks over at Paizo and at um, Kobold and Green Ronin
yeah.
and just like the just a panoply of geniuses that have come through this particular hobby. I don't know if I don't know where I fall in that. I'm happy to be a part of the 50 years, right? I'm happy to be like, have
I'm
been
just happy all
an
those
element.
people let me come to their Christmas parties.
Yeah, we had some times.
All
That's the
right,
funny part people don't
Mike.
understand. Yeah, is that so much of our stuff was done over beverages.
So thank you, Mike. We're about an hour and a half. I, as I often say, I could keep talking for another hour and a half, but
Well,
uh,
we can, just not
we
with these people.
right, right. Well,
All we
yes.
have to
I would say
do.
you hold on. I'm gonna make an outro, and then we can talk for another 3 hours. But I also might invite you back to have another conversation later on, so these people could listen to, because
Okay,
I think they like it. If all
sounds
the
good.
chat is to be believed, they're enjoying listening to you as much as I am.
Awesome.
But
Happy to be
thank you,
here.
Mike. As say we were talking before, loansharkgames.com is where you can find the stuff they're doing, including the book, which will apparently have a whole lot of my art in it, um,
Yeah.
and lots of other fun stuff. So check them out there. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for joining me. Hold on a sec, and I will come back and chat with you after I do an outro. So thank you to Mike Selinker for joining me for an hour and giving me the insights of all his crazy ride through the game. It's interesting. He and I have paralleled a lot longer for quite a while before our paths intersected, and I'm glad that I continue to be able to do things with him occasionally and learn things I didn't know about him as we go through it. Thank you, everyone who joined in today in the chat. It was a very busy chat room. I hope everyone is doing well. Next week, on Wednesday, it's going to be Christmas Day, so I will not be here live, but there will be a recorded episode that goes live in the same slot, 6 p.m. Pacific time on Christmas. So come on back. Whether it's also the first night of Hanukkah. So whichever candles you're lighting, you can after you have your turkey or eat your latkes, you can sit down and have another 50-year in the dungeon episode to share. Thank you everyone for joining in. I will see you again real soon. In fact, tomorrow night I'll be back for an episode of Random Encounters, my improv cartooning show. So maybe you want to join me then. Till then, take care everyone, and I'll see you soon.